When archaeologists study the earliest traces of wine, they are often not looking at a bottle, a vineyard label, or a written recipe. They are looking at broken pottery, dark stains, grape pips, buried vessels, and microscopic chemical clues left inside clay. That is the strange beginning of this story. Long before stainless steel tanks, temperature gauges, cultured yeast, refrigeration, pumps, filters, and laboratory analysis, people were already making wine in ways that could survive heat, travel, oxygen, harvest failures, and time. The mystery is not that ancient people discovered fermentation. The mystery is how many problems they learned to control before they had the language of microbiology or chemistry. But the most surprising part was still coming. Modern wine can look effortless because its danger has been hidden inside equipment. A tank can cool the fermenting juice before heat damages it. A pump can move thousands of liters without exposing everything to air. A selected yeast strain can push fermentation in a predictable direction. A laboratory can measure sugar, acid, alcohol, sulfur, and volatile flaws before the human nose notices anything. Earlier winemakers had none of that. Their tools were feet, clay, stone, wood, gravity, sunlight, smoke, resin, baskets, and time. Their mistakes could turn a harvest into vinegar, bitterness, mold, or a thin drink that died before winter. The data revealed something nobody expected: many old methods were not random rituals. They were engineering solutions disguised as tradition. This investigation follows 10 techniques that carried wine through the centuries before modern wineries made production clean, fast, and repeatable. Some began as preservation tricks. Some were ways to stretch a scarce harvest. Some shaped flavor by accident before becoming regional identity. Others controlled pressure, temperature, oxygen, or sugar with nothing more advanced than a clay wall, a human foot, or a sunlit loft. The point is not to pretend the past was better. Ancient and pre-modern wine could be unstable, harsh, smoky, sour, sweetened, diluted, or dangerous. But inside these methods is a deeper story about human observation. Wine survived because people learned to read matter carefully, one harvest at a time. In Georgia, one of wine's oldest surviving technologies begins underground. The qvevri is not simply a clay pot. It is a buried fermentation chamber, a storage vessel, and a temperature system all at once. Grapes are crushed, then juice and solids can be placed into the vessel. The mouth is sealed, and the earth does what a modern cellar tries to imitate: it slows sudden temperature swings. That matters because fermentation creates heat. Too much heat can push aroma away, stress the microbes, and make the wine unstable. Buried clay works like a stone memory of the season. It cannot chill like a refrigerator, but it can soften the violence of the harvest. The real clue was not in the object itself, but in how people used it. The vessel changed more than temperature. In many traditional versions, skins, pips, and sometimes stems remain with the juice. This contact can build color, texture, bitterness, aroma, and structure. White grapes handled this way may become amber rather than pale, because the skins release compounds that modern white winemaking often avoids. Imagine tea leaves left in hot water. A quick dip gives a light drink. Long contact makes the liquid deeper, stronger, and more tannic. Clay adds another layer. It can breathe slightly, unlike glass, but it does not flavor wine like a new wooden barrel. The result is a method where earth, fruit solids, and time become a single instrument. The technique feels ancient because it is, but the logic behind it is surprisingly modern. The image is easy to misunderstand: people standing in grapes, moving rhythmically in a vat. It can look ceremonial or even crude. In practice, foot treading solved a specific mechanical problem. Grapes must be broken open so the juice can flow and fermentation can begin. But the seeds contain bitter compounds that become harsher when crushed too aggressively. A human foot spreads pressure over a broad, soft surface. It can split berries without grinding everything into paste. Before rollers, destemmers, bladder presses, and programmed pressure cycles, the body itself became the calibration device. What looks like a folk custom was also a way of controlling extraction with remarkable sensitivity. In Portugal's Douro Valley, traditional port production preserved this method in shallow granite troughs called lagares. Teams moved together for hours because extraction had to be both steady and controlled. The goal was not just to get liquid. It was to pull color and tannin from grape skins before fermentation moved too far. That timing mattered because port production later interrupts fermentation with spirit, preserving sweetness. The old laga shows how one technique can sit inside a larger system. Foot pressure, skin contact, sugar, alcohol, and time all had to meet at the right moment. What happened next changed the entire debate, because it proved that some old methods remained useful not because people were nostalgic, but because the physics still worked. For most of wine history, nobody opened a packet of yeast and poured certainty into a tank. Fermentation began because the harvest carried life with it. Microorganisms lived on grape skins, in the winery, on tools, in cracks, in old wood, and in the air of the cellar. Some helped. Some competed. Some could ruin everything. A modern selected yeast strain is like assigning a trained crew to finish a dangerous job. Ambient fermentation is more like opening the door to a town and hoping the right workers arrive first. Yet older winemakers learned patterns. Some vineyards fermented reliably. Some cellars developed their own microbial character. Some vessels seemed to start faster than others. The deeper pattern was hiding in plain sight. Wine was not made by fruit alone, but by an ecosystem. The danger of natural fermentation was never just whether fermentation would start. The danger was who would dominate before alcohol protected the liquid. If beneficial yeasts moved quickly, sugar became alcohol, carbon dioxide pushed oxygen away, and the wine gained a shield. If spoilage organisms gained time, the same grapes could become sour, mousy, volatile, or lifeless. This explains why old cellar habits became strict even when their science was invisible. Clean vessels mattered. Healthy grapes mattered. Harvest timing mattered. A cellar that had successfully fermented many vintages became valuable because it had memory in its surfaces. The method was risky, but it also gave wine a connection to place that industrial control can sometimes flatten. Modern wineries can strip berries from stems with speed and precision. Earlier winemakers often worked with the cluster as it came from the vine. That changed the chemistry of the vat. Stems can lift the mass of grapes, letting juice move through it. They can add tannin, herbal notes, and structure. They can also create harshness if they are green, broken, or used carelessly. This is why stem contact was never a simple yes or no decision. It depended on ripeness, grape variety, vessel size, and how long the wine stayed with the solids. In one harvest, stems could help build architecture. In another, they could make the wine taste hard and angular. Maceration is the quiet negotiation between liquid and solids. Color comes mainly from skins. Tannin can come from skins, seeds, and stems. Aroma compounds move at different speeds. Temperature, alcohol, pressure, and time change what is extracted. Pre-modern winemakers could not graph these variables, but they could taste the result. If the wine became too coarse, they learned to shorten contact, press earlier, or treat certain grapes more gently. If it lacked backbone, longer contact or more structure could help. The process resembles steeping tea, but with one important difference: fermentation keeps changing the solvent. As sugar becomes alcohol, the liquid pulls different compounds from the same material. That made timing one of the oldest forms of cellar intelligence. One of the most important forgotten distinctions in old winemaking was the difference between juice that flowed freely and juice forced out under pressure. Free-run juice could drain from crushed grapes with little violence. Press wine came later, when skins and pulp were squeezed harder. The difference mattered. Pressing could add color, body, tannin, and bitterness. In small amounts, it could strengthen a weak wine. Too much could make it rough. Ancient and pre-modern presses, from beam mechanisms to baskets, were not only extraction devices. They were sorting tools. They separated a harvest into fractions before modern analysis could name the chemistry behind the difference. That explanation was only half the story. A press was never just a tool. In many periods, it represented capital, land, and control. A trough could be made locally, but a large press required timber, skilled construction, space, and labor. Roman agricultural writers described more elaborate pressing systems, and archaeology shows how production sites directed juice through channels, settling vats, and storage vessels. The technology allowed more complete extraction, but it also created hierarchy inside wine itself. The first liquid could be prized for delicacy. Later pressings could be blended, sold differently, diluted, or assigned to lower status use. The same vineyard could produce more than one social category of drink. Pressure turned grapes into economics. Another old technique changed the wine before the grapes were ever crushed. Instead of fermenting fresh fruit immediately, people dried grapes in the sun, on mats, by hanging clusters, or in ventilated lofts. Water left the berries. Sugar, acid, flavor, and phenolic material became more concentrated. The same quantity of fruit could produce a smaller amount of denser, richer must. This was not magic. It was dehydration used as a flavor and preservation strategy. A fresh grape is like a diluted archive of the season. Drying removes part of the water from that archive, making every remaining page darker and more intense. But the price was risk, mold, rot, uneven drying, and loss of volume. The Romans knew sweet wines from dried grapes, and later Italian traditions preserved related logic in forms such as Ricciotto and Amarone. In Valpolicella, a passamento became a disciplined craft, selected clusters, air circulation, careful spacing, and months of slow dehydration. The technique could produce sweetness if fermentation stopped with sugar remaining, or power if yeast converted much of that sugar into alcohol. This is why dried grape wine often feels outside the normal scale of table wine. It begins with grapes that have already been transformed. The crucial revelation is that pre-modern winemakers were not only fermenting fruit. They were editing concentration, timing, and risk before fermentation even had a chance to speak. Some ancient wine carried a flavor modern drinkers might find startling: pine. In the Greek world, resin was associated with amphory, sealing, preservation, and eventually taste. Before glass bottles and reliable closures, oxygen was an enemy. A porous or imperfectly sealed container could shorten the life of wine. Resin helped protect vessels and could leave its aroma behind. Over time, what may have begun as a practical defense became part of a recognizable style. Retsina is the surviving clue. It reminds us that flavor history is often preservation history. People did not always add taste because they wanted novelty. Sometimes taste was the shadow left by a solution to decay. The story of resin also exposes a pattern repeated across wine history. A technique can begin as protection, then become expectation. If generations drink wine with a resin note, that note stops being a side effect and becomes identity. Later producers may reduce the intensity, refine the grapes, and control the addition more carefully, but the memory remains. This is how old wine styles survive modernization. They are not preserved exactly as they were. They are translated. The modern bottle may be cleaner, more stable, and less aggressive than its ancestor, yet it still carries the trace of a world where a container, a tree, and a fermenting liquid met inside the same problem. Not all pre-modern wine problems were solved in the vat. some were solved over fire. Roman sources refer to concentrated grape must such as defrutum and sapa, made by boiling grape juice down into a dense sweet liquid. This could be used in food, but it also reveals a winemaking instinct. If the fruit lacked enough sweetness, if balance was poor, or if a wine needed help, concentration offered a tool. Boiling drove off water and thickened the must. The result could sweeten, color, enrich, or make a rough liquid more useful. It was an early correction method, built from the harvest itself. Before sugar was cheap and cellar chemistry was understood, grape syrup gave people a way to bend wine after nature had already made its decision. This technique also warns against romanticizing the past. Some historical accounts and later analysis connect sweet grape reductions with lead vessels, because lead could create a seductive sweetness while also poisoning the body. Whether every household used such vessels is not the point. The lesson is sharper than that. A solution can work in the glass and fail in the bloodstream. Pre-modern winemaking often balanced practical success against invisible costs. People could detect sweetness, sourness, bitterness, and spoilage, but they could not see toxic chemistry. The old cellar was brilliant, but it was not innocent. Its genius came with blind spots, and some of those blind spots were dangerous. After fermentation, wine does not become clear by command. It settles. Dead yeast cells, grape particles, tartrates, skins, seeds, and other solids collect at the bottom as lees. For a winemaker without modern filtration, sediment was a problem that had to be read carefully. Leave wine on heavy, dirty lees for too long, and it could develop unpleasant flavors. Move it too early or too violently, and the wine might lose protection, texture, or stability. Racking, the act of moving clearer wine away from sediment, became one of the cellar's quiet arts. It used gravity, timing, and patience instead of membranes and pumps. Clarity was not just appearance. It was survival. Yet sediment was not always the enemy. Fine lees could give wine texture, soften edges, and contribute bready or nutty impressions in certain styles. The same dead yeast that looked like waste could become a slow source of mouthfeel and complexity. This dual nature made lees contact one of the most subtle old techniques. It required judgment, because the boundary between useful contact and dirty spoilage was thin. Modern winemakers can measure, protect, and filter with greater control, but the underlying question remains ancient: should the wine be separated from its past, or allowed to rest with it a little longer? In that question, cellar work becomes almost philosophical, but the consequences are entirely practical. Before modern varietal branding taught drinkers to ask for one grape at a time, many vineyards were mixed. Different grape varieties grew together, were harvested together, and fermented together. This was not confusion. It was insurance. One variety might bring color, another acidity, another perfume, another sugar, another reliable yield. In a year when heat damaged one grape, another might hold freshness. In a cooler season, an early ripening variety could rescue the blend. Field blending made the vineyard itself part of the recipe. Instead of correcting every imbalance later in the cellar, growers built diversity into the land. It was a biological hedge against uncertainty, long before climate data and precision viticulture. The final technique begins after the best juice is already gone. Pressed skins, seeds, and pulp still contain flavor, color, alcohol, and value. Instead of discarding them, people could add water and create a weaker second drink. In different traditions, drinks like Piquette or Roman Lorca occupied a lower rung than fine wine, but they reveal something essential about the economics of fermentation. A harvest was too precious to waste after one pressing. The elite might drink the strongest and clearest fractions, while workers and households consumed lighter secondary drinks. What appears to be a lesser wine is also evidence of a complete system, where scarcity shaped taste, class, labor, and resourcefulness. The forgotten techniques of winemaking are easy to misread. Buried jars can look mystical. Foot treading can look theatrical. Resin can seem strange. Boiled must can seem crude. Palmist drinks can seem poor. But each method answered a real problem: heat, oxygen, bitterness, weak grapes, unstable fermentation, scarce sugar, transport, class, labor, and waste. Modern wineries did not replace superstition with science in a single leap. They often gave names, instruments, and safer controls to questions that older winemakers had already been asking with their hands. That is why these techniques still matter. They reveal a time when every harvest was an experiment, every vessel was a theory, and every glass carried the memory of people trying to make nature last a little longer than it wanted to,